My name is Rob Zochowski. I'm the Director of Impact Weighted Accounts at Harvard Business School. I am joined by my colleague DG Park, who leads our environmental research pillar.
Yes, the Impact Weighted Accounts Initiative's mission is to drive the creation of financial accounts that reflect financial, social, and environmental performance. And we do this through 3 different pillars, which are employment, environment, and product. And I don't know how many of you have read the Theory of Change paper, which is our flagship paper. It is basically the joint initiative between...
Let me just interrupt. I think we're going to assume no prior knowledge.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So it's a joint initiative between Global Steering Group for Impact Investment and Impact Management Project, as Rob had mentioned. And right now is a project being incubated under Harvard Business School with Professor George Serafin. And today we're going to discuss focus on the environmental pillar, which has dealt with monetizing the environmental costs of emissions produced by a company's operations. And we developed a methodology for investors to use publicly available data to derive monetary environmental impact for organizations in a cost-effective, scalable, transparent, and comparable manner. And as we began developing our environmental methodology, there were a number of different challenges that we had to grapple with. And for example, there was clearly an unequal disclosure of data points, since the vast majority of companies didn't really provide us with all of the 6 of the data points that we need to calculate the organization level environmental impact. So we needed to find a way to create a reasonable comparability across companies, but at the same time also figure out a way not to create any perverse incentives to not disclose emissions data by penalizing only the companies that were more transparent. And also we discovered many cases of data quality issues within the Bloomberg and Thomson Reuters databases. So we also had to develop a methodology to control for the accuracy of data. And third, in order to address the inconsistency in monetization factors from different sources, we decided to use the environmental priority strategies methodology, which is also referred to as EPS methodology, for a more comprehensive and uniform system of monetization factors. Lastly, in terms of monetizing the organization level water consumption, we decided to supplement the EPS methodology that I just mentioned by incorporating the local water scarcity data and economic costs of water. So this way we were able to develop a more systematic approach through which investors can calculate monetized environmental impact to compare companies within and across industries. So I'll begin with the main takeaways from our research. First, we were able to confirm that measurement of environmental impact from operations is feasible for many companies in the economy with publicly disclosed data. And secondly, these measurements of organization level environmental impact contain information that's different from the environmental ratings that are currently widely used by investors and other stakeholders, as I'll discuss more under the key findings section. And lastly, our conclusion was that once environmental impacts are priced in, they can become quite significant hidden liabilities and value erosion for many organizations. And before we dive into the key findings from this research, I wanted to help you visualize and understand what kind of differences we find in environmental impact across what investors would typically think of as similar countries, as similar companies. So here's a simple comparative analysis of some of the biggest automobile companies globally and their environmental performance in year 2017. And to make this as straightforward as possible, I've included the environmental costs of only the GHG emissions which is then divided by the revenues of these car companies. For example, the environmental damage caused by the GHG emissions from operations for company D, as in dog, is around 2.5 billion USD, which represents 1% of its sales revenue. And when we compare this with other car companies, we see that the environmental damage caused by company A, for example, at the top of the chart, is around $2 billion, representing 1.4% of its revenue. And in the meantime, the environmental damage caused by company J at the very bottom of the chart amounts to around $1 billion, representing only 0.5% of its revenue. So in other words, for every $100 of sales in 2017, company A's emissions of greenhouse gases from its operations cost about $1.4 of environmental damage, while company J's cost only $0.50 or 50 cents. So like in this chart, as you can see, among the 10 companies shown, company J is the most GHG efficient, whereas company A is the least GHG efficient. Next, we'll cover some of our key findings from our research. First, in box 1, we find that close to 60% of the variation in environmental impact of a company is driven by its industry membership, while approximately 30% of it can be attributed to firm-specific factors. And the remaining variation is then driven by country and more granular industry classifications. In box 2, we find that the environmental impact that we calculated exhibits negative yet moderate correlation to the ratings of 3 widely used environmental ratings providers. And this is consistent with the view that the firms that have greater negative environmental impact would receive lower ratings. But what we also find is that our estimates of environmental impact contain information that's different from that in environmental ratings, especially when we compare firms within industries. And so we discover a significant decrease in correlations between environmental impact and ratings within an industry. And as we explained in our paper, these ratings providers are not necessarily measuring environmental impact, but they rather intend to show how well a company is managing the environmental risks and opportunities. So by comparing our result to theirs, we demonstrate that our research is indeed a value add in this space. Next, in box 3, we examined the environmental impact at an industry level. And we examined that, not surprisingly, industries in the utility, energy, and transportation sectors score very high. And the same is true for industries such as construction materials, paper and forest products, and chemicals industries. And what's more surprising perhaps is the large variation across companies within the same industry. So between the third and first quartiles within each industry, we find large variations among companies, which suggests that company-specific factors can play a pretty meaningful role in driving environmental impact. Lastly, in box 4, we evaluate whether the calculated environmental impact is reflected in market prices of the companies. Overall, we find a negative correlation of environmental impact with both Tobin's Q, which is the market value of a company divided by its assets replacement cost, and the price to book equity valuation. So our analysis here suggests that a firm with twice the environmental impact has about 2.3% lower Tobin's Q and 4.7% lower price to book value of equity. But we also find that on the industry level, there are industries like metals and mining and oil, gas, and consumable fuels that show notable misvaluation relative to companies' environmental impact, as in their Tobin's Q are not very much affected by the environmental impact that they cause.